Okay, good evening. That's right, it's a nighttime video. This is Reconstruction. This is the last video for Unit 4, and it is the last video for 1301. Congratulations, you've made it to the end. So this is going to be a real basic reconstruction. It's mainly going to focus on political reconstruction, but there will be a few little sprinklings of other things. So let's go ahead and get going. There are three types of reconstruction. Reconstruction. Okay. Political, economic, and social. As I said before, we're mainly going to focus on political, not very much economic, although I will sort of define it, and not too much on social. These two you'll get enough of in 1302. So let's start with political reconstruction. Political reconstruction has two parts. Okay. Part one right? The individual state is once again represented in Congress. Okay? Remember, when the states left the Union, their congressmen and their senators went with them, with one important exception. All right. So getting the states to have congressmen, getting the states to have senators, that is the first part of political reconstruction. Second part of political reconstruction is when the state is once again, ooh, I'm having some problems here. Paste. Sorry about this. This thing is being a major pain in the Patunsky. Well, it's called redemption. And that occurs when local whites in a state take back control of the local state government. Redemption won't begin until 1872 and will end in 1876. Now, these words, when local whites take back control, why are they not in control to begin with? Well, during Reconstruction, white Southerners are not American citizens. Sorry about that. They cannot vote. They cannot hold office. Boy, my typing is even worse than usual tonight. Hold on for a second. There we go. White Southerners are not American citizens. Okay, so they cannot vote. They cannot hold any type of political office. Okay. During political reconstruction, the South will be dominated by three groups. One are carpetbaggers. Okay. These are Northerners who move to the South and fill the political vacuum. Okay. So, for instance, those of you familiar with Texas history know that Texas's Reconstruction governors were not from Texas. In fact, our last Reconstruction governor, E.J. Davis, was from Illinois, right? So carpetbaggers, Northerners who moved to the South, fill the political vacuum. Second, let's up this keyboard tonight. what are called scalawags. And these are Southerners who cooperate with carpetbaggers. So if you've managed to stay awake in Gone with the Wind to hour 57, Rhett Butler's character, played by Clark Gable, becomes essentially a scalawag. He cooperates with the carpetbaggers primarily for financial reasons. And then the third group, free blacks, but not in huge numbers. So these groups will dominate Reconstruction until about 1872 when redemption occurs and whites in the states, Southern whites, start taking back control of their government. Okay. Economic Reconstruction. In the North and West, there's pretty much an economic boom that will continue. A few hiccups until 1929 when the Great Depression occurs. Okay. This is going to be fueled by gold and the 14 million immigrants who come to the U.S. after 1865. Most of those immigrants are going to stay in the North or the West, Great Lakes, going all the way out to the West Coast. All right. Very few of those immigrants will head into the South. So it's pretty much going to be an economic boom. There are some panics, the Panic of 1873, the Panic of 1893, but until 1929 in the Great Depression, it's pretty much fairly good. In the South, the greatest thing of value, the slaves, are gone. Not literally, but the investment. Slaves had been the largest single investment that Southerners had in their economy. I think they have a figure for it. Used to is the word you want to focus on there. I don't know where it is now, but I mean, easily 10, $20 million. Let's see if I can find the answer real quick. Sorry about that. Well, in 1860, the value of slaves would have been $4 billion. Holy crap, I was way off, which translates to $42 trillion in today's money. So $4 billion gone. It's just gone. Yeah, just gone. Just $4 billion. And so the South is going to be in an economic depression pretty much until the 1940s. Now, there are exceptions. Texas, obviously, because of oil, will not be in the sort of same economic depression that the rest of the South will be in. But honestly, there are parts of the South where when the Great Depression came along, they could not tell the difference. And so we're going to say that economic reconstruction of the South will remain uncompleted until World War II. That is when the South will finally start coming up out of the depression that's been then. Okay. Social reconstruction how ex-slaves would fit into society, questions around voting rights, questions around legal rights, the question of whether, at what point, or the attempt to make them legally equal to white Americans. And some would argue we have not reached this point. Again, that's a personal thing. Excuse me. Someone would have to study and come up with their own answer. So those are the three types of reconstruction: political, economic, and social. We're mainly going to focus on political, of getting the states back into the government. You'll get economic and social reconstruction in 1302. Okay, the 5 plans of reconstruction. Now, 2 are presidential, 3 are Congress. The first plan for Reconstruction was called the Lincoln Plan. And find it. Come on. Sorry about this. Roaming around. All right, Lincoln Plan. Oh. Oh, the Lincoln Plan, there we go, also known as the 10% Plan, announced in 1863. 10% of the people who voted in 1860 must take a future loyalty oath. Then they can elect delegates for a state constitutional convention and submit the new constitution to Congress. No reparations or apologies are necessary. And the purpose was to show the South how easy it would be to come back into the Union. Remember, Lincoln was always very much about getting these people to stop fighting, all right, and rejoin the Union. Congress did not like that plan, and so Congress came up with their own plan called the Wade-Davis Bill. Republican plan presented in reaction to the painless Lincoln plan. 50% of white males must sign a retroactive and future loyalty oath before a state constitutional convention can form. The problem is that anybody who soldiered, paid taxes, used Confederate money, sold crops to the Confederacy, gave any signs of allegiance to the Confederacy could not sign. Purpose: the plan was intentionally unworkable because the radicals did not want to discuss grievance until the war was over, and Lincoln used what is called the pocket veto to kill it. Those are the only two plans that are put forward during the actual war itself. Okay? The other plans are going to happen after the war. Okay? The difference, though, is that we have a new president, President Andrew Johnson, our 17th president. Remember when I said that after secession, all the congressmen and senators left? Well, Johnson did not. He is the senator from Tennessee, and he did not follow Tennessee out of the Union. And that's part of the reason Lincoln picked him to be his vice president. But now much of the South has been destroyed. As we can see here in these pictures. And so we have the destruction. About 800,000 people have died. There are now 4 million slaves. That their future has to be worked out. I mean, in parts of South Carolina, they didn't even have shovels to bury the dead. That's how much society had broken down in some parts of the South, particularly those parts Sherman had gone through. So we need a great thinker, and we don't get one. We get Andrew Johnson. Now, when Johnson became, there are two, there's a wide range of attitudes with regards to Reconstruction. Let's see if I can get a layout for this. Yes. So over here was a group called the Radical Republicans. And their plan was to completely remake the South and give land to former slaves, completely upend the South from its antebellum farming, bring in manufacturing, bring in Northern values about work, and just completely remake the South and punish the planters, probably by not giving them their U.S. citizenship back and probably putting great restrictions on their future. The Democratic Party was to let bygones be bygones. Hey. Oh, sorry about the war. Let's just go back to the way things were. Now, in the middle of these two groups are just the regular Republicans. And if I could put a third box in here, if I were more talented at this thing, you would just be Republicans right here who don't want this easy piece, but aren't necessarily enthusiastic about this sort of punishment of the South. Now, when Andrew Johnson became president, Johnson was on the side of the radical Republicans. He really wanted to crush the planters, to remake the South, giving land to slaves. He wasn't terribly enthusiastic about that, but certainly some updating of the Southern economy in a way that left the planters out in the cold. In fact, if you were a planter and you wanted your citizenship back, you had to go to Washington, D.C. and personally ask Andrew Johnson for your citizenship back. So he was pretty hard on the planters. However, by November of 1866, Johnson has shifted all the way over to the Democratic side. Why does he move all the way over? I'm glad you asked. He had three reasons for moving over. One, he hates New Englanders. Well, guess who the radical Republicans are made up of? New Englanders. No ability to compromise, and I do mean no ability to compromise. Um, the founding fathers knew that compromise was important, but Johnson was not going to take any example from them. And then he was unabashedly racist. He was from Tennessee. Um, I believe he had owned slaves, but let me double check that. Yes, about 10, but he had freed them all in August of 1863. So, um, polite clap, I guess. But that also would have been several months after the Emancipation Proclamation. So, polite clap. But freeing the slaves did not take away his basic learning with regards to racism. And so, as he got into conflicts with the radical Republicans over their plans, it slowly pushed him over here. And the thing he could not abide, if you're really looking for like a deal breaker, the thing that Republicans insisted upon, even the sort of Republicans in the middle, that they insisted upon that Johnson would not give them was black voting. Johnson did not think that black people should be allowed to vote. And that really broke him, not only from the radical Republicans, but even the regular non-radical Republicans who might have found a way to work with Johnson. He broke from them. They broke with him as well. Johnson did announce a plan for Reconstruction. This is actually the Lincoln Plan #2, but he thought it might have gone better if he'd have just called it that. But instead, he calls it the Johnson Plan #2. Percentages were dropped. The more, the better. Remember, we talked about the loyalty. Johnson also recommended that literate blacks, however that's decided, be allowed to vote for delegates. Not that literate blacks be allowed to help write the Constitution or vote on the Constitution, only that literate blacks, again, whatever that means, be allowed to vote for the white men who will write the state constitution. All of the Confederate states attempted to use this plan, but the state constitutions they wrote contained black codes, which were nearly as stringent as the old slave codes. Under the new black codes, black would be unable to sue whites or give testimony against them. The states also made the mistake of electing former Confederate officials, the most notorious example being Alexander Stephens. Remember the Cornerstone speech way back in the second lecture, the 1860-62 lecture? That guy got elected governor of Georgia. There were also problems with states, southern states, demanding money for freeing their slaves, which looks to me like they haven't been paying attention. A couple of them refused the 13th Amendment, which is the amendment that ends slavery in the United States, more or less, since it still exists in the United States. And South Carolina, man, talk about people who do not learn their lesson. In South Carolina's new constitution, they literally wrote that white employers would be called masters and that black employees would be called servants. So, way to read the room there, South Carolina. Congress refused all of these Confederate constitutions. 11 former Confederate states sent their state constitutions to Congress, and Congress said, "Get the fuck out of here with that stuff." Right? Congress now came up with their own plan for Reconstruction of the 14th Amendment plan. All a former Confederate state had to do was ratify the 14th Amendment to be readmitted. 3 sections. People born in the United States or naturalized are citizens of the United States and their state second. This overturns Dred Scott. Remember, Dred Scott had said you were a citizen of your state, then your nation. If a state denies suffrage to male citizens, its representatives will be denied their vote in Congress, and it invalidated the Confederate war debt, which denied the Confederacy's existence. Tennessee was the only former Confederate state to ratify it. So Tennessee now rejoins the Union at this point. The amendment would be ratified in 1868. Its rejection led the radical Republicans to claim that the South had rejected a more than fair deal. And so this leads us to the 5th and final plan of Reconstruction, which are called the Reconstruction Acts. The 10 is, again, Tennessee is already back in. So the 10 remaining states are divided into 5 military districts and occupied by the Union Army, whose purpose is to register voters and guide the states through the process of writing and voting a new constitution to send off to Congress. Okay? And that will be in 1870 and will last until 1876. Johnson tried to veto this. Congress simply overrode his veto. Now, at what point do Southerners start getting their citizenship back? In 1872, Congress passed the General Amnesty Act, which restored citizenship to all former Confederates except Lee and Davis, who got theirs back. Lee was already dead by this point, but his family got his back. And then Davis got his back in the 1980s. But once the General Amnesty Act has occurred, I say has occurred, then Southern whites can run for office and vote, and what we call redemption begins, which again takes from 1872 to 1876. Um, 15th Amendment to the Constitution. Let's just get it out of the way here. State cannot deny the vote based on race, color, or previous enslavement. So that is, when is the 15th Amendment? Clearly the date's not important if I don't remember it, but 1870. It's not important, but kind of the completest that way. In 1868, the Republican Party chose Ulysses S. Grant for their nominee for president. Andrew Johnson was clearly not going to be anybody's nominee. Even the Democratic Party did not want him. Grant was chosen. He's a war hero, which always goes over well with Americans. We've elected many war heroes to office, whether we should have or not. And most importantly, he felt that Reconstruction was Congress's business, not his as president, which is what Congress wanted. Now, stymieing Reconstruction, stymieing this election was the issue of the Klan. Oh, that's the Klan. There they are. The Klan had been formed as sort of a fraternal organization for former Confederates. I myself have not found, and again, my knowledge here is limited, so if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But it appears, from what I've read, the original Klan really was just a fraternal organization. The whole idea of terrorizing the shit out of people does not appear, from what I've read, again, I have not read everything, does not appear to have been its original mission. By 1868, though, the Klan was having an effect on elections. If you look at the 1868 elections, there is massive violence in the South. People are killed, people are scared into not going to vote. Witnesses were murdered. Anytime there was an attempt to put the Klan on trial, witnesses would be murdered. And, you know, the local jury was just other white people in the area who were not going to convict Klansmen, their own people. So it was very, very difficult to get the Klan prosecuted. Just to give you an idea of how effective the Klan was, in the 1868 election in the state of Georgia, there were 9,700 registered Black voters. Okay? 9,700 registered Black voters. 22 of them voted. That's how effective Klan, Jesus, I can't talk, Klan, and the threat of the Klan was. 1,000 people were killed in Louisiana during the 6 months before election, 1868. 200 people were killed in Arkansas. In 1870, Congress passed the Ku Klux Act, which suspended habeas corpus to battle the Klan. It basically allowed the military to hold trials for Klan members rather than local civilian. Only about 1,000 people went to jail under the Ku Klux Act, but it was enough to break the Klan's power at this point. Now, this does not mean that it was safe to be a black person in the South. Just because the Klan had gone away does not mean the violence is going away. In fact, it's going to start getting worse after 1877. And the Klan, of course, will come back again in the 1920s, the second Klan. But there at least is some precedent to use federal power to try to battle groups committing terrorist activities. The question in 1872, Grant is reelected, even though his presidency was marred by scandals. He did manage to win reelection. In 1876, people were kind of wanting to know when Reconstruction was going to end. The Union Army had been occupying the South now for 6 years. Congress was ready to move on. A lot of the abolitionists who had fought so hard and so bravely were beginning to die off, and a lot of other issues were sort of coming back, like prohibition and women being able to vote and those type of things. So the enthusiasm for Reconstruction was really beginning to fade by 1876. The 1876 election pitted the Republican Hayes versus the Democrat Sam Tilden. And there turned out to be a problem with the election. There were voting irregularities in several states. And so this sort of gummed up the whole process of knowing who the new president was going to be. But Democrats saw an opportunity. And so out of this election came what is called the Compromise of 1877. Democrats gave Republicans presidency in return for the withdrawal of the Union Army from the South. So the Compromise of 1877 sort of marks the end of Reconstruction. The end of protection for African Americans in the South as well. It'll get bad after that. After Reconstruction ended, Southern states began looking for other ways to stop black voting without violating the 15th Amendment. So they came up with three. First were poll taxes. Poll taxes would be used in this country until 1965, where you had to pay a tax when you registered to vote. Two were called literacy tests. Tests about the Constitution. I would encourage you go out on the internet and find one of these literacy tests and see if you can pass it. Because there are some hella hard questions in there. I'm not even sure I could pass it if I didn't already have an answer key to them. And then third, what we call grandfather laws, which you could vote if your grandfather voted in 1860, which pretty much disenfranchised all black people. These laws would also be used to stop Asians from voting when our Asian population begins to build up in the late 19th century. And it would be used to stop any Mexican Americans or Hispanic Americans from voting as well in the Southwest, particularly Texas, and then moving out New Mexico, Arizona, all those places. Single greatest failure of Reconstruction. I know, how can you just pick one? No land was given to former slaves. There are some experimental attempts to do so. You may be familiar with the phrase 40 acres and a mule. That was an experimental program, but only on a very, very small level. The bulk of the 4 million former slaves, generally wound up working for the people they had worked for before slavery ended. In the short term, blacks in the South would have no economic power. In the long term, they would have no political power. You will not see the political power of African American black Southerners until they have economic power, and that won't be until after World War II, and that's when you start to see that civil rights movement in the South. But that is something you will hear about in 1302. All right, that is the end of the Reconstruction lecture. The end of this unit and the last lecture for this class. Hopefully it wasn't too terribly boring. And I hope to see either in class or out here on the internet again, some of you in 1302. All right, have a good evening.